as a BTS fan. Why BTS?
Great question. In terms of the maybe more objective things, I think, Ash, do you think you're idolizing? Oh, sorry. I should have asked you that when I was with you at last weekend, and you were so offensive. How stupid do you think people are? Just wait until you meet Jesus. He's so much better than you'll meet. So come, discover this. Should we all end the pod with our ending fairy being like, anyway.
Welcome to another episode of the UTS podcast. I'm Paul, joined by my co-host and a good friend, David, as usual. And we've got a very special guest today, Ash. Thanks for joining.
You're welcome. Yes, I am Ash. I'm friends with Paulie and his wife, Joanne. And I've known Ire for a long time too. And I'm just meeting David tonight. What do you want me to tell about myself, Paul?
Shout out to Ire, given that you mentioned him. He got ordained last week. So he's an ordained Presbyterian minister. So congrats, Ire. But yeah, tell us what you do during the week, what you like to do in terms of hobbies, families, whatever you think people need to know.
Well, during the week, I live in Seoul, South Korea. I have lived kind of the northern areas of Seoul, but I'm about to move south of the river. So it feels like a big move.
I thought you were going to say the northern area of Korea. And I was like...
Yeah, I've been in the north.
Yeah.
No, we wouldn't be saying that online. I live in Seoul and I support the local church there. I've been part of a church in Jamsil near Lotte World, for those who know Korea a little bit. I have been there for 2 years at that church, and most of those 2 years so far has been full-time language study. Don't ask me to speak Korean now. I won't. And that's been really fun, but very challenging. So a lot of my life has been studying. However, now I'm in Australia waiting for my new visa because I am joining a wonderful mission organization called OM in Korea. I'm joining the Korea team. And so, yeah, praise the Lord. I'll get to be their next generation mission mobilizer. So what does that mean? Well, it means I'll be working with them and local churches and hopefully some university campuses to be training the Christians in Seoul to, I guess, have a greater assurance of the gospel for themselves and know how to articulate the gospel for themselves and then share that with the people in their lives. I think we'll get to talk about this a little bit more later on, but it's really exciting, the chance to think about what evangelism looks like right now in Seoul amongst both locals and foreigners, but particularly amongst a younger generation that perhaps is losing its Christian background a bit. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. What I enjoy doing is that, thankfully, but I also enjoy sitting on my couch. I enjoy walking as well. And while I do those things, I read, but I read by listening usually. I've been listening to podcasts and Sudoku. I do Sudoku so much that I dream about it. I don't know if you've ever had that situation when you've done something so much, but yes, I dream about a never-ending Sudoku, and it's not a stressful situation. It's a fun situation. So I love Sudoku, and I love TV. I studied film, so I love film and I love TV, and Korea's great at both of those things. I also love music, and Korea's good at that too. So that's kind of me. I hang out by myself. I hang out with friends, and usually music is involved with either of those situations. That's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we'll talk more about your experience in Korea, but we had Jamison on the previous episode. When you said you listened to podcasts, I was going to ask you which of our podcasts was your favorite episode. But no, we had Jamison on. He was actually our first guest, believe it or not. So he actually makes it into the Mount Rushmore of the UTS podcast, which actually means something because we've got 5 people, including you.
I complete Mount Rushmore. Is there 5 of them?
Exactly. So yeah, you might replace Jamison, you might replace Ire. Who knows? We need more diversity.
I hope not.
But one thing we did do with Jamison was, before we talked about him being a teacher and MTS, we talked about anime, which is one of his hobbies. And when we decided that we're going to have you on, we knew exactly what we had to talk about, which is what we talked about in our first episode, K-pop. Which also happens to be the content, and probably the only content that actually got some attention on social media, which kind of leads me to think that it's actually K-pop that they're interested about, not us. But nonetheless, we'll take the attention. And Ash, would you call yourself a diehard K-pop fan or group?
It depends. Like, I would like to say yes, but it depends what people think is diehard.
Yeah.
I like to think I'm a fairly moderate
Yeah, I mean,
fan.
you're certainly more credible than myself, David, or Yurei. In
Well, now
terms
the expert has arrived.
exactly when it comes to K-pop, we are unworthy to untie your shoelaces. So yeah, tell us about how you got into K-pop. Who's your favorite group? I think it's quite obvious, but yeah, how did it all start? What was the attraction, and how big of a part did that play in you going to Korea?
Great questions. Well, it might not be obvious to those who don't know me, but if you know me, you know that my favorite group is BTS. I've been in ARMY for a long time. I actually, I am far from a K-pop expert. I got into BTS before I got into K-pop generally. So actually, that was only around 20. I was into Korean TV and things like that kind of 2015, 16, but then BTS was only introduced to me kind of 2017. And our good friend Monique had introduced me, and I remember we were driving in the car and she was playing me this music, and I was like, oh yeah, I don't understand a word of it, but it sounds kind of boppy. And then she said, yeah, but you just got to watch it. And so as soon as we get home, she turns on that Save Me music video, and it was love at first sight. I was just like, oh my goodness. So, I've always loved BTS since I saw the Save Me music video. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. It's a great gateway. And then it actually took a couple of years, I'd say, before I really got into K-pop more generally. And so now I would say I'm definitely a fan of K-pop, but there are other people who know a lot more than me, who spend a lot more time and money on it than I do. But I do enjoy it thoroughly. And I've had a fair amount of time to think about the interesting aspects of K-pop and the relationships and parasocial things that happen and all that kind of stuff, the business models that occur. So, yes, I do like talking about it. I like thinking about it. And I think what attracted me at first was, well, for me, I've always loved dance, believe it or not. You're looking at a ballerina of 12 years. I know it's hard to tell, but I loved dance. And so for me, that's why watching them. And I just thought, how are these guys that in sync and that good? And then let alone when you watch them live and they're singing as well. And yeah, and live is a different thing. Anyway, I was just blown away by this thing that was kind of like Eurovision in terms of its flamboyance, but then way more professional and actually taking itself a bit more seriously. So I kind of loved that aspect. I also loved that K-pop generally, and it's losing its way a bit sometimes, but particularly back then, it felt like K-pop had a lot more variety of music that didn't involve swearing or sexualized language or explicit themes. And I am someone who, even though at the time I didn't know a word of Korean 12 years ago or 11 years ago, I always want to know what I'm listening to. And so I would look up the lyrics in English, and I was just really excited to see things that weren't singing about a lot of the things in a lot of Western media that sometimes is a bit off-putting. So that's K-pop with me, although Korean TV was first.
Talk about BTS, Ash. I'm not sure what you're seeing on your screen, but when you're talking or when someone's talking, the outline goes purple. So I just thought it was very fitting.
It is fitting.
For an ARMY.
Very
but
good. That's good from you, Paul.
I mean, it might be interesting for you, Ash, because you said you were a BTS fan before you were a K-pop fan, but it seems like BTS was a segue for you to become a K-pop fan eventually. So retrospectively looking back, you talked a bit about what's unique about K-pop or what drew you to it, but what do you think stands out about BTS compared to other groups? Obviously, they're massive, but I remember when they first started becoming super popular, and this is just coming from a place of genuine, just being honest. I wasn't hating on them, but I was like, they didn't.
Yeah, why?
On the surface, they weren't exceptionally better looking than the other groups. They were good looking. I just couldn't pinpoint exactly why them. Now obviously I know some of the reasons why looking back, but as a BTS fan or as a K-pop fan, Ash, why BTS?
Wow, great question. I feel ill-equipped to answer it. But, I mean, it's never one thing. It's just a bit of magic, like the Lord's favor, I suppose, in that as much as I disagree with you in that they are all stunning people, but I think if we're to compare them to particularly other groups at the time, and particularly as they were debuting, EXO was the big thing. And, I love EXO. I think they're phenomenal. But you could kind of see how EXO had kind of come through under SM and was a bit more like your stock standard kind of what you're used to in what was the big three, one of the big three companies back then. And I think I think there's reasons why I love them, and I'm sure that that's a big thing for a lot of ARMY around the world. But in terms of the maybe more objective things, I think Bang PD, as much as people might hate on him in the media right now and online, what a businessman, really. Like the way he marketed these men, these young boys, really, is just, I think it's really fascinating. We look at him and people like JY Puppy, as I like to call him. It's just quite interesting to see.
Give us an
like,
example of what stood out about his strategy, because like you said, there was YG before that, who obviously had their own thing that differentiated them to SM, so giving more onus and creativity to the artist, Big Bang being the classic example. So you seem to be saying that there was something unique that Bang PD did to BTS. So yeah, what were some of the things that you observe?
I think, and again, I wasn't, sadly, there at the very beginning with BTS. I was a couple of years in, but I watched it all. I went all the way back and I've combed through all the footage and all those things. I think some things were very new and fresh, but other things he just marketed very well what had kind of existed. We've got this idea in K-pop of like the Weverse app is one example of where idols interact with their fans. And that's a platform that happens in a number of different ways. Back then, or like particularly before Weverse live videos started happening and things, it was from V Live, and BTS was part of that first push where they really did, even pre-debut, they were doing vlogs and things, posting things, being like, who's this member? Who's that member? Who's going to be next? Getting people kind of really keen. And they were really engaging with the fans and doing what you'd call fan service, like a lot of just great communication and events and things that got people feeling like, oh, maybe I'm friends with these guys, or I feel like I really know them. And something that's quite endearing that I noticed, even back in 2016, 17, when I then looked back at other groups at the time and just even stages, like you watch awards shows or things like that where there's multiple artists at a time. And before BTS came along, K-pop was this incredible machine where everything was perfect and everybody was perfect. And you couldn't really step outside and be kind of a normal human because you had to be this perfect kind of representation of the idol that everyone wants to love and look at and be perfectly in step. And so almost, a bit robotic. And you kind of wondered sometimes, like, which smiles of these are real? And it sometimes was a bit scary to watch. And then you've got BTS who, of course, were very professional and had a bit of that anxiety and nerves when they first started. But apart from the fact that they started and were a very different genre in a sense, they wrote, they had a big hand in writing their music, and it was very much about like against the system and against pedagogy in Korea and the way that education works and the way that generations have expectations on each other and all these kinds of things. So they were writing kind of heavier music that people, and particularly young people, related to and agreed with. But then you've also got them being a bit silly or showing their friendship on stage together, or particularly through these vlogs or lives that they would come and do, the ways they'd interact with fans. They not only were quite fun and real with fans, but they also seemed to show their genuine brotherhood and relationship. And there's always people who kind of look at different groups and they kind of say, oh, is it all for show? Are they just kind of trying to win people's hearts by pretending to be close? And I just, people have said that about BTS over the years as well. I just think that is just wild. No one's that good an actor. I just like when you watch them and the way they've grown up and before they debut, they live together, like literally sharing beds sometimes. And that was what was for me the most endearing thing. That I'm not saying that no other group had, and particularly these days, a lot of groups have that beautiful kind of friendship amongst themselves. But I think the winning thing, particularly at that time, was Bang PD using this model that marketed this group of boys who were friends and just trying to survive through teenagehood. And so you kind of then felt like you could be included in that and watch this wholesome activity of people sharing this jong, almost like this sense of going through hardship and experiencing things together, whether it's good or bad, that kind of brings a sense of affection. So you kind of feel really affectionate watching their affection. I feel.
That's really insightful. So you're basically saying what they brought in was that authentic self, being vulnerable and genuine, which, by the way, I think sort of surged around the same time, didn't it? Like the end of the 2010s, around COVID. That's when not just K-pop, but social media, celebrities, just media in general, like there was a big push for being authentic. but all the while still being staged, and like they weren't being so authentic that they were saying things that's worth being cancelled for. You know what I mean? But they were, I suppose, the producers or Bang PD gave them enough freedom to be authentic enough to stand out from the other K-pop groups prior.
And just be a bit imperfect, you know? We all want to see someone who feels a bit more like us up there. And so having boys be a little bit silly, like year 8 boy energy in the most wholesome of ways, it's kind of what you like. And they're still like that, and they're all 30. So, you know, that's kind of what is very endearing for people, I think.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that was quite educational for me. You've had a chance to speak about BTS. I'm going to give you a chance to speak about other parts or other groups in K-pop, especially recently, that you've enjoyed listening to, or trends in K-pop that you've been seeing that you've appreciated, as well as also what I call the joys and jolts, as well as things in K-pop or trends that you've been seeing that perhaps you aren't so happy with and you wish had changed. So if I can start with the limited K-pop that I've been listening to, I think I might have shared with Yirei and David before, but I'm not a heavy consumer of K-pop. The last group that I genuinely enjoyed listening to is New Jeans. It's quite sad what's happening with them. I don't think it'll ever be the same, but I'm happy to let that be a beautiful memory in the past. But
they're back.
I know, that's what I'm saying. They're back, but to your point about producers, I think producers play such a big role in K-pop.
I'm
so
nervous.
yeah, so
I have high hopes, but
I have
will
high
they
hopes.
be dashed?
But yeah, I don't want to be disappointed. But the other group that caught my attention was, because the main way that I consume K-pop is like when I run. Boy, K-pop and running, match made in heaven. It goes really well. If you're listening and you're a runner and you haven't tried listening to K-pop, put that in your playlist. You'll go 30 seconds quicker in your pace, guaranteed. But Cortis, have you guys heard of Cortis? They're great.
Yes!
Oh man, they're great.
You stole mine. You stole
Okay,
my
there you
one.
go. I mean, you can elaborate. I'm not like crazy over them, but I genuinely enjoy their music, and I got to see some of their interviews and to get a feel of their vibe. And I think they seem to, I don't know. I don't want to kind of call out and say they're going to be the next BTS, but they seem to be taking that youthful, free energy that BTS brought perhaps to another level. Like they seem to be having a lot of input into coming up with the music, the lyrics, the dance moves and everything. And yeah, a lot of them are like second gen, like Western American, or at least some of them seem to be fluent English speakers. And yeah. But yeah, Cortis, I really enjoyed them. David, have you been listening to much?
No, the K-pop to me is like ARMY, right? And Zion T.
They're
That's
great.
K-pop.
So
they're
so
great.
literally Korean music, not necessarily idol
exactly.
music.
So I don't really know where K-pop is, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
there's this.
I'm
I
pretty
think
liberal.
what you were describing was K-pop in that idol group, dance music. I don't know if I can call it dance music, but with beats and things like that. Maybe
It's as
for
broad
some people
as
that's
a Protestant.
K-pop.
A Protestant can
Exactly,
umbrella.
that's right. So
yeah, I'm a Christian.
yes, yeah, that's right. So yeah, so I'm more into those kind of
Okay,
music,
who do you enjoy?
different end of the spectrum. Yeah, ARMY is one of my favorites in the Korean music scene. Lee Chan-hyuk, the male member of the team.
Do you have views on him as a Christian artist?
Well, I think his depth is showing in his music. Not necessarily he's not overtly Christian in the most recent songs, is my current feeling. Like he did have like a very Christian songs in the previous album. But I don't think he's restricted by that, I'm going to do a CCM album type of thing. Maybe he wants to later on.
He's not trying to be like a Lecrae. Do you guys know Lecrae, the Christian?
exactly.
Yeah. He's more of I guess, like what Justin Bieber or what Kanye's doing, right? It just comes out naturally in some. Maybe not Kanye, but maybe JB.
Maybe Kanye is a bad example, but like sense of
maybe Kanye's
this King album was peak.
I was gonna say maybe it's doing injustice to Kanye because he actually dedicated the whole album.
That's true.
But
that's true.
Not anymore. But yeah. Yeah. All right, back to you, Ash. So Cortis or any other? I mean, you can elaborate on Cortis.
Yeah, I was going to say Cortis. I'll just share now with our millions of viewers that I kind of have this ongoing joke with some friends that I am actually Cortis's manager. And that's because I very nearly did apply to be their manager. I have a couple of friends in the industry, and before I got this dream position that I was always praying I might get with OM, the opportunity to do full-time paid ministry in Korea, I thought that wasn't going to be possible for me, but now it is. So thank you, Lord. But
Next in
when
rank
it was
was
looking
Cortis
like
manager.
yeah, well, and specifically what is interesting is because you likened them to BTS, and not only so under Hype labels, Cortis is specifically Big Hit as well, which is where we get BTS from. And so I think it's really fast. I mean, of course there were people before BTS. Of course there were people who also kind of opened things up a bit, particularly in Asia for people like BTS. But really you can't compare what BTS has then blown open and paved the way for. And so I think that kind of idea and then these little boys, Cortis, coming along, that just wouldn't have been possible even 10 years ago, let alone 15 years ago, for them to behave the way that they do, run their own accounts, film their own videos online and things like that. Just wouldn't have been done, wouldn't have been acceptable, and they wouldn't have felt comfortable to do that. Anyway, I love Cortis. I love a lot of their music. I am hoping to get the chance to see them in Seoul because there's one show left at the university near mine and I'm not going to pay for pre-sale, so they'll probably sell out. But who knows? I would love to see them. They do only have 12 songs, but that's fine. They're great. If you want to run, go to Cortis. They're great. I think what I like about Cortis, which again, for me, as you might be able to tell, K-pop, sure, I've enjoyed the music, but there are people who really love it for the music. And don't get me wrong, some of it I'm obsessed with. But it's never started at the music for me. It's always started with the production and the presentation and performance and or the people. And so for me with Cortis, I'd heard a bit of their music as they debuted and I was like, oh yeah, interesting. But it was actually when I went through and saw their social media things were coming up and I was like, these kids are hilarious. I really like these kids. All of them do speak English as well, which is fun. I don't think it's necessary.
It's not like
but
RM
obviously
having to do all the heavy lifting and then every other member comes in. Actually,
that's right, which I think is, as they would
this.
say on their latest album, is what actually makes them peak. But anyway, I think it's quite fun watching these kids who literally it feels a lot more like year 8 boy energy because they probably were only in year 8 a couple of years ago. And literally, we were just talking earlier about my brother who's almost 15. These kids are like 17, 16, 17, something like that. Debuted when they were 15, 16. So yeah, they're really fun. They're very talented. Martin has produced a lot of things even before they debuted. He helped writing for some of the best songs in K-pop, like Deja Vu by TXT, I would say is their best song, and he worked on that. I would also say Magnetic by Idolatry, which was their first big hit, also worked on that. Like just really cool things. It's very talented. So I think Cortis deserves a good go because they are very involved, but they're also just really cute, fun guys who just have a good time and they seem kind and yeah, quite eager to just still entertain well and have integrity with what they do. So yeah, would get behind Cortis. Hashtag proud Cortis manager is who I am.
Very nice. What about any griefs or anything that you wish would change in K-pop? Can be shallow, can be deep, can be whatever.
David?
Yeah, I'm not too deep into K-pop culture and the industry, the ins and outs. I'm not a manager of a K-pop group, so I don't have the industry insider knowledge, but you mentioned that these kids are like 17, 16, debuted at 15. I do wonder though, like the amount of effort and the amount of grind that went into that living, the selection, curation, and nurturing that goes into this machinery of K-pop, the mental health and general health aspect of these kids is something that I do wonder in terms of long-term effects. We've seen incidents before and we're still seeing incidents on stage because their schedules are crazy when they're doing all these different concerts, shows and things like that. And they're like fainting on stages. That's crazy, right? So those sorts of things I do worry. Yeah, that's the big thing for me.
Mental health aspect is interesting because I'm sure there's like millions of trainees that we never get to know about. So
Yeah, that's
there
right.
are mental
Yeah.
issues associated with that and stresses if you don't make it. And even if you do make it, there's another unique set of mental issues that you have to face, right, as a superstar. So yeah, either way,
But I
there's
guess
serious
it's not
issues.
unique to K-pop though, right? It's like if you're going to have that level of excellence in any field, you do have to, put in that effort. So I'm not like discounting all of their hard work. It's just the way that it is handled sometimes is, I wonder if there are better ways of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think they need a chaplain. That was that was actually my real goal was like, well, there's literally a role for manager that's open right now that I've been invited to look at, but they don't have chaplains, unfortunately. But I was like, this industry needs a chaplain or two. Now, I'm sure there might be like Christians involved somewhere, and we know that there are a number of K-pop idols who claim to be Christians. Some might take that more seriously than others.
JYP's trying to open up a Bible college, isn't he?
Wow. Well, given the latest music video, I find that so interesting. Love JY Puppy. Yeah, I think it's an industry that clearly has a lot of weaknesses. Yeah, a lot of scary things, particularly because we are talking about people who are children. No one debuts at 30, I mean, maybe we should change that. That'd be nice. But that's not, I have no desire, by the way. That wasn't a thing about me. But you, Paul, I mean, let's talk about you. Get that face on the screen. And maybe, should we all end the pod with our ending fairy being like, anyway, do you know what an ending fairy is? Anyway.
Yeah, we're not that out of touch, Ash. Yeah. Ending your job. Yeah.
I was going to say, what was something I wish would change? Something like, I guess it's not that basic, and it's something that is never going to change or never anytime soon. I wish they wouldn't do schedules on Sundays. That's just my opinion. I mean, we're kind of slipping into territory now of Korean culture generally. But it really, and having friends in the industry, and before people come after me, I do not personally have any close friends who are idols, so don't bother me with that. But knowing people in the industry, and I'll leave it at that.
Not yet, until you get that job.
As of 9:27 p.m. in Sydney at the 30th of July 2026, I don't personally have any close friendships with any idols. But yes, knowing people in the industry, etc., I think Sundays are often the day where they do lots of filming for things like their awards shows and Inkigayo and things like that.
I've never thought about that. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
So it literally just means that like it's not impossible, but it's incredibly difficult, even if an idol, let alone someone who's a manager or works in that industry, it is incredibly difficult to be a regular church member at all. You might be lucky to get 2 Sundays a month and you're pretty exhausted. You might have come after finishing work at 4 a.m. or something like that.
Sorry, Ash, I just have to ask, what did you have in mind when you were applying to be Cortis' manager then? Were you willing to give up church, or were you going to bring them to church?
Great question. Well, that was actually as well because it was being particularly advertised with foreigners in mind, and that alongside I actually don't think I'd ever want to work for Hybe. Hot take. I'd be willing to work for JYP maybe. And I think that's also because I was willing to get to the stage where if they even asked me in for an interview, I would then say, you've advertised Monday to Friday 9 till 6. Is that true? I don't know how that's possible. So if they had in mind a foreigner, particularly to help with English things, that really did mean mostly, because sure, you might have to go for overseas trips or whatever. And remember that managers there's multiple. There's never just one manager for a group. So it's not like you're the one doing everything with them all the time. But anyway, yeah, I was very much less likely going to apply with Hybe. But JYP, like, it does advertise as a Monday to Friday thing, 9 to 6. I'd even be more willing to do some wild hours in the week if you could guarantee me that I could be a regular member at my church on Sundays and that I wasn't exhausted and wishing I were dead those days. And you know what? I reckon this is, maybe you cut this out, I don't know. I actually think maybe when you don't have choice, so I do have choice. So I would say no to things that encroach on that. But when you don't have choice, I even think it's different when it's like, oh, well, actually Sundays are really impossible, but I'm part of this church every Wednesday night and I have this regular group of Christians that I sit under the word of God with. And I think that's different again. We don't want to be all like Sunday or nothing kind of thing. I do think it is the regular meeting with believers and listening to the word of God that is the important thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so
and
I
also
was
a day of rest as well, right, for these kids.
Yeah, at
It's
that,
yeah,
that
come on.
at least. That's right. It's funny you say that though. Like, I mean, it is also different working in ministry, but I wonder how many Koreans see their church day as a day of rest.
Yeah,
Curious
that's a good
about
one.
that in Sydney
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But
Great question. Yeah.
anyway, where should we go from here?
No, it's great discussion. Should we go to Q&A? So
Let's do
I've
it.
actually compiled a couple of questions that we received from the millions of
Curated
our
from hundreds,
Curated,
from hundreds and thousands.
Sorry if I didn't
of
get to your
questions.
message. I try to read them all, but they were coming in quicker than I could read them.
Yeah, fair.
But no, so I didn't include everything, but what I tried to do is pick out the ones that had common themes in them and group them together. So the first one's for you, David, actually. So the question is, quote, in your podcast, you mentioned how K-pop presents a safe and distanced relationship. However, God provides clear examples, showing us the importance of real and sometimes messy and ugly relationships. How, therefore, can we better equip ourselves to take the risk and pursue real ugly relationships in the church community?
Yeah, that's a really good one and a practical question as well, right? So I think the context of what we were talking about in the first episode was around that parasocial relationship, the use of Weverse or other social media platforms to interact with the idol, the star, and you're kind of, anonymous in some sense in amongst the crowd. You're not vulnerable, you're not visible to the star, but you have that sense of connection, that closeness and intimacy without that vulnerability, without that risk of them finding out who you are and that sort of thing. So because I have a background in sciences and public health specifically in this, for this topic, I did some literature search on this, and it's really fascinating that in terms of the parasocial dynamics, there are some psychologists were arguing that there are actual benefits of parasocial relationships or dynamics because there are people with trauma or hurt from real relationships. They could kind of use parasocial relationship as a wheelchair before they can get back on their feet to try the real messy relationships again, right? And when I was looking at all these systematic reviews, it's fascinating that those studies happen at the 2020 mark. That's year 2020. All the studies up until that point talks about the positives of parasocial relationships. But after that, when I see the more recent studies, they're really emphasizing the harm that could come by that parasocial dynamics. And I do wonder whether that's augmented by the technology that we have access to, right? The social media, Ash was talking about the business model of getting them engaged so much that they get addicted to that sort of parasocial relationship. Maybe that's one thing. Another could be that loneliness pandemic that we're experiencing post-COVID, right? Post-COVID, like 16% of all population is experiencing that sense of loneliness, which is a crazy figure when you think about it. So maybe those two have a factor into these sorts of dynamics that we're seeing here. Going back to the question though, I do feel that as Christians, what we do need to do is simple in some senses, because Hebrews 12:2, we look to Jesus, right? We look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and see what he has done. He could have stayed in his comfortable seat on his throne, but he came down. That's the incarnational relationship that he wanted to have with us in that messy and real way. And so looking at Jesus's example and how he's approached relationships, that closeness that he endured, the pain and suffering that he endured. So that should be the first toolkit for us to meditate on what Jesus has done and who he is. The second part, I guess, is to be healthy, right? So if you're not healthy in your relationships and in your mental health and other things, then you cannot feel that safety to be vulnerable with other people, to get into that messy things in life. So we talked briefly about having that day of rest, right? You need that day of rest to recharge and have that sense of wholeness in yourself so that you go out there and face messy things that's happening in your life. May that be with your church members and the body, or maybe at work and other friends. You just get in there and just get your hands dirty and live life together, right? So those two things I would say on that.
Yeah, no, great answers. Thanks for that, David. The overwhelming theme in the questions, as well as the sorts of comments that we got, was the notion of idolatry, which is ironic, but also in a way unsurprising, given that we literally call them idols. So I might direct this one to you, Ashi, given that you are a fandom of idols yourself. So the question is, as Christians, how can we distinguish just simply enjoying K-pop as a form of God's good gift to us, to when it becomes an idolatry that is venturing into sin and putting him above God, etc., and maybe answer it in a context of self-examination as well as maybe some signs to tell from others. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. It is a great question, and one that is right for us to ask, particularly of ourselves. I don't know that, at least in my experience and then in the circles I've been in, I wonder if idolatry has still been a little bit understudied. I just think that sometimes we're quick to call things idols when maybe they're not, but we do have to be careful. So I think the key question of enjoying something versus idolatry, well, hopefully as believers of the word, we can recognize that God gives many things that are good, many things to be enjoyed with thankfulness. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, well, particularly when we give God the glory and the thanks, what's there to hold back with, in a sense? And I wonder if... Did anyone read Tim Keller's Counterfeit Gods book? I didn't, actually. But I hear great
That
things.
was my first book that I read of him, or any sort of cultural apologetics. Yeah, that was my
Would you
gateway
recommend
into
it?
Yeah, I'll recommend it.
To read,
I
yeah.
mean, I haven't read it in years, but yeah, I'll definitely recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's on the list of
Actually,
10,000 books that I would like to read.
I might have gifted it to a couple of my friends in Korea when I visited a couple of years ago. Yeah, because I thought it was so. I mean, it's useful for all of us, but I just thought it was very, like, all the more fitting for the Korean audience. The pervasive idolatry, not just with K-pop, but with, career and money and status, things like that. Yeah, but sorry, go on.
Yes, profound. And perhaps we'll talk about that later on the pod as well. But yeah, I think, look, is this thing giving me my ultimate meaning, my ultimate joy? When this thing disappoints me, because it will I be destroyed? And I think, to use kind of a funny example, earlier in the year, a particular favorite group of mine, not clearly the favorite, BTS, they would never.
Not King David, but a king of a kingdom.
That's right. Well, I had a distressing time in March because a particular member left a particular group, and it was a big shock to the fandom and the industry. Many people were like, "What? Where did this come from? Oh my goodness!" And
is it One Direction?
I mean,
Sorry,
no. But look, it feels like that. I remember I was never a One Direction fan, but I remember how huge that was when Zayn left.
It was anything but One Direction. It was
many directions.
Six directions. Yeah.
Are there six? I don't. Anyway, let's not get One Direction fans on our case. I honestly, I'm not lying, guys. I was distraught. I was devastated. Now, there were particular reasons, mainly because they decided to do this 3 days before they were coming to Australia, and I was in Australia and they were going to perform, and it was the first time I was ever getting to see them live. So I was a little bit peeved about that, and he's one of my favorite members. Anyway, I digress. That was kind of the example where I could have said again to people like, do not trust in princes. I was like, I'm so sad. I couldn't sleep. I was like, I'm so sad. But I knew in my head, I was like, this is like, it doesn't actually mean anything for my life, Like, I'm fine. It doesn't affect me that deeply. I can go on living. I'm not destroyed by this information, let alone, when you face, just think about how many scandals have happened in K-pop. Some are a bit more ridiculous than the next, but some are legitimate, some are criminal. And so you think, what if your beloved bias in your group turns out to be a sinner, God forbid? Then how do you actually deal with that? And so I think we really do need to ask ourselves what's controlling, not just affecting emotions, because trust me, my emotions get affected. That's fine. But what's kind of controlling my emotions to the point of feelings of worth, identity, control, and purpose, or what's affecting my decisions? And perhaps it's what's controlling the way I spend my time and my money. Is God and his people and his mission actually, are those things what's controlling my life ultimately? Or are my kind of desires in this area kind of taking over? So we do have to think about those things. But I'm glad this question came up because I actually want to answer it from a different angle, particularly when we think about, you kind of finished the question, people were kind of saying for self-examination and perhaps in seeing it in others. As someone who's been a K-pop fan for a long time and amongst many white people who didn't know what Korea was for a long time, and as a woman who's quite passionate and emotional in my expression, there can also be a lot of misogyny when it comes to assessing fandom in other people. And so I would say, is it for us to examine others? Now, in one sense, the Bible says yes, the church is to be discerning and we are to call our brothers and sisters out of living in sin, X, Y, Z. So yes, we do love one another and we do, in love, draw things to people's attention or whatever. So I'm not saying that we never could, but the whole kind of like take the log out of your own eye before you, I just think the things that people have said to me before, or the like holier than thou, like, Ash, do you think you're idolizing a little bit? It's like, oh, sorry, I should have asked you that when I was with you at the soccer game last weekend and you were screaming your head off.
That's right.
Yeah. Great point.
Or, sorry, how much did you spend on that jersey? Like, you're asking me about a ticket that I bought, but you just, what? There's plenty of, and particularly, and it's not just men, but you do often see there's a bit of a discomfort. And trust me, I've also received comments from women. So it's not necessary, but I think there's a discomfort in the way that particularly women express joy and fandom and excitement and things that we can go a bit like, oh, calm down. Like one of the things I've often heard is just like, well, I just want you to imagine do either of you watch football or like any kind of sport? Okay, wrong crowd.
I watch almost every.
Paul does.
I watch every.
Do you have like a favorite player or something?
In which sport? I've got plenty.
Pick one that you love.
Shohei Ohtani. Roger Federer.
Ohtani. Great choices. Oh, but you just like him because he's handsome, don't you?
No,
That's right.
Yeah.
No one asks you that. People always say that to girls who like K-pop, like, you just like them because they're good looking or something. Or like, she's not perfect, right? Oh, thank you. I was living in some deluded world. Thank you so much for pulling me out of the pit. I was convinced that I was going to marry this man who's perfection and walking on earth. So offensive. It's just like, oh my gosh, how stupid do you think people are? So I just think like, let's also just not automatically judge, particularly if someone expresses their joy or entertainment of something, the same way that we would be like, okay, this guy loves painting Warhammer on the weekends. Great for him. Good for him. By the way, not a cheap hobby. So it's also like you can make all the same kind of arguments, right? Like, how much time and money you're actually spending on that.
Yeah,
or like,
great
I love
point.
that.
Yeah. So I think just really ask, do I actually have to worry about other people with this? But then I do think particularly with those who maybe we feel a bit responsible for if we're a bit older or something like that, and we maybe kind of notice some questionable things, then sure, in love, you pray about it and you go, am I saying this in love? And am I saying this hoping the best of that person? Because I don't want to come and say, are you having a problem with idolatry just because I want to give them something to rebuke them over? But actually just asking genuinely like, oh, how's this going? Like, Do you ever
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
right.
this is, oh, that's great. Let's keep praying that this doesn't become an issue. Like just thinking about how do we address those kinds of things is
And
probably,
with a bit of curiosity, then
yeah,
judgment as well, right? So it's like,
that's right.
okay, you're really passionate about this. I just want to find out, what's so interesting about these sorts of topics in love, right? I don't understand
Mm,
fully about Paul's passion for all these sports that he posts on Instagram, but because we're friends, because we love in Christ, I can, we can have a chat and things like that. So, and in the end, right, idolatry is never serving the God. Is always about serving me, right? So it's about the desire that we're trying to fulfill by loving this external thing. Like the whole comments about parasocial relationships, that is poor souls trying to fill a God-shaped hole. It is a desire, deep desire that we have for intimacy, for belonging. They're trying to fill with, it just happened to be that. In this circumstance, in their stage of life, it just happened to be that because it was the most readily accessible. I don't know why. But for other people, it's sports, right? The collective identity of we won something, we won the World Cup, but you didn't actually, right? You didn't do anything. But you said we won it because you want that collective glory and you want that fulfillment, and it's serving you. You're not serving the Spanish national team. That's not the idol. You're serving yourself, right? So I think we need to go a bit deeper rather than saying you're looking at those idols. That's idolatry versus that's a sport thing.
Yeah, and this is brilliant. But just to Ash's point again, and to your point, David, it's almost like, and to side with our sisters a little bit, men saying that is almost kind of shooting yourselves on the foot, isn't it? Because a part of the reason why the women are crazy about these boys, perhaps you could point to ourselves, because men around them have failed to be good examples of. So yeah, I mean, that could be a part of it too. But no, that's brilliant. Brilliant.
This is why we need diversity in conversations, right? Like I never thought about misogyny as a factor, but this is fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely not what I had in mind in terms of identifying in others. I was assuming it was coming from a place of genuine care and friendship, but it's still a very good point that you raise, Ash. And I wonder if there's a part of me that thought similar, not just about K-pop fandom, but to any other group that you don't necessarily relate with. We're so quick to judge the sins that we are not naturally inclined towards, aren't we? It's so easy to. The same thing happened with the LGBTI in the church. Anyways, brilliant points. The last question was, and again, this was a commonly expressed question: how can we spread the gospel to our fellow K-pop lovers?
I'd love David to start so I can jump off his ideas.
Off the top of my head, what we were already discussing about that deep hole that we all have, the God-shaped hole, is something that we can tack onto and say that the desire that people have for these idols, this admiration of excellence, this propensity for awe, right? Awe-seeking tendencies in people. Why do we look at these music videos, this wonderful production and the live performance, and we were drawn into that because we seek awe? And why do we do that? Maybe those sorts of avenues might be a good way into a conversation around, okay, we're all here, we're all enjoying this concert, but why do you think humans are wired to enjoy these sorts of things? So that could be maybe an opener for a conversation. But I think in terms of the positives of K-pop and fandoms is the friendship between people, right? We talked about the messy relationship versus the safe relationship. In the parasocial dynamics, I think the distant relationship thing stands. But with this people-to-people relationship that happens within the fandom, I think that's a genuine, beautiful thing that happens when you like something together, you have that shared interest. But that just nurturing that relationship, just keep going and having that friendship going, because by having that relationship, you will have opportunities later down the track to be able to have those conversations when the opportunity is right. So you're not going to just like, at the end of a concert, just immediately go into for spiritual laws or anything like it, but maintaining that relationship so that God can use that to open up opportunities, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I agree. Oh,
Mm.
we might get him back.
Yeah, I think he's back. Yep.
Joined. Apologies.
Yeah.
That's fine. David had fantastic points that you'll only find out during
I'm
editing.
sure he did. Yeah, I feel like one of the listeners. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, kind of jumping off the end there then of David's thing, just about like the points of the relationships. Actually, one of the key things I was thinking about, because there's kind of two ways I feel like answering this question. The first one is almost a bit like, I don't know, I feel like evangelizing my friend who likes K-pop is a bit the same as evangelizing anyone else. And a big part of that, which I think what we can do, particularly if I'm a K-pop fan and they're a K-pop fan, and I can also share my own joys, just ask them like, yeah, why do you love that group? What do you love about them? Or what do you think so good about, K-pop? And just like asking some questions that maybe are even a little bit deeper than they've kind of ever thought about it before. But then every K-pop fan is different and likes different things for different reasons. And so for one person, it may be, yeah, maybe I've got this male attention need and it's not being met at all. And so I kind of dream about these males here. Or maybe it's wanting to just escape and feel like I have friends that won't ever judge me and will just like accept me. Like whatever it might be, just listening. Like, why do they love it so much? And what about it do they love? And so I guess thinking, how does the cross of Christ actually kind of answer whatever needs or desires that are never fully met or are always disappointed in the end by things like another human or their music, etc. But back to David's point about relationships, I think one of the coolest things to me about evangelizing friends over the years has been just the power of God's community, like people who are believers who love one another. Jesus' words saying like, they'll know you're my disciples by your love for one another. I think that's such a prayer that we ought to have of all of our local churches, but really any time we engage with other Christians. And so as I've introduced non-Christian friends to various Christian friend groups, really wanting to make my friends their friends kind of thing and make it more attractive to them. It's not just going, oh, well, look, now there's 10 of us versus one of you. And so isn't it more reasonable now? I mean, apart from there's a phenomenon to say that's probably actually what happens for them. But more than that, I think it's really attractive the way that healthy, loving relationship works in the body of believers. When it works the way God intended it, it's so attractive. And so I just have countless friends, and one of my best friends in particular who's not a believer yet, she's just always saying like, your friends are just so different and I love your friends and they're so kind. Or they're like, you guys just have such healthy relationships. And like, I've never heard you say one bad thing about any of your friends or, just different things like that. And so I think, just to cut this short now, one of the coolest experiences I've ever had growing up from late primary school in the church was all the different camps I got to be a part of, whether it was just me and my church, whether it was my youth group, whether it was the national training event for university students, however big or small it was. The awesome feeling of being in a loving community where we get to do fun together, we get to have deep conversations, pray for one another, have real friendship. The closest thing I ever got to experiencing, like when you're on a high at a camp or something, was two things. Supernova, the Comic-Con version in Australia, where everyone's kind of geeky and just happy to be there and love seeing other geeks. And everyone's walking around with signs being like free hugs and everyone's super welcome. It was really weird for me the first time I went. I was like, this feels like a Christian camp. What's going on? And then the other time was Taylor Swift, because she did that for people too. It was like bringing all different people from different ages, cultural backgrounds, and giving a shared thing where let's just love one another. Let's just have fun. Let's just be each other's hype boy or hype girl. And that's certainly true for ARMY as well with BTS. And it's quite funny because then you get the feral fights between different fandoms. But typically within a fandom, you'll often have groups that, you really bond. And I went to see earlier in the year when I was visiting Australia, I went to see a concert movie about a K-pop group that I loved. And there were these little like year 8 girls handing out bracelets that they'd made. And everyone was in there just so happy to be there and being like, hi, like, who are you? And it's just like this really lovely community of people. And it makes people feel loved and welcomed and accepted and encouraged. And that's lacking a lot And so I think how cool to be able to take that and go, yeah, isn't this great? Let me show you another thing that's great. And at the end of the day, I always say with friends who are often talking about, oh, your friends are so great, or that friend is so kind, or how are you guys so content, or whatever it is. I'm just like, you think Christians are great. Just wait until you meet Jesus. Like, he's so much better than any Christian you'll meet. And it's really all because of him that we love and live this way. So come, discover this. So I wonder if it's just asking what it is, figuring out what are their needs and desires and why do they love K-pop so much? And then just like introduce them to Christian community and hopefully show them how good it is. And I think K-pop fans typically love the good vibes, the like encouraging one another vibes. So that could be one way as well.
No, that's brilliant. This is very impromptu, but can I quickly pray for what we talked about in K-pop before we move on to another section? Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you're a good God who gives us many good gifts, from K-pop to the things that we wear, everything we eat, to the very life that we own. We thank you mostly for your greatest gift, Jesus, in whom we have eternal life. May we, as Christians, love him more than anything, more than our favorite K-pop group, and more than anything in our lives. And also, may we be Christians who are not quick to judge the speck in others' eyes before seeing the log in our own eyes. May words of encouragement and rebuke always come from a place of love rather than judgmentalism. And we just pray for all the K-pop fans around the world, that many K-pop fans would come to know Jesus, who provides infinite more joy and greater sense of community for those who are in him, in whose name we pray. Amen. Now, let's move on to the second part of our pod, which is talking about Korea. Yeah.
Something that surprised me is that you hear this thing like, oh, it's a Bali culture. It's all fast, busy. Mate, people are so slow on the it actually kills me. Think of Korea. They send the most missionaries out of any country in the world. Bro, okay, where are you getting that data from? What is a missionary? Do you know the gospel well yourself? Like, are you fully convinced of this? Do you take joy in this? So teach it. Like, we're talking about kidnapping. I have all this stuff today. It's all coming out.